Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Legendary classic rock band Jethro Tull plays Wolf Trap in Vienna, Virginia in a few weeks on August 24th. I spoke to frontman Ian Anderson about bringing the flute into rock music for a career of hits, from Aqualung to Locomotive Breath to Bungle in the Jungle, and even got his thoughts on that Aqualung spoof by Will Ferrell in Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy. Hey, Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. Hey, thanks so much for joining us on WTOP.
Well, Jason, you're using your radio voice, and it's nice to be with you. And I'm using my my slightly tired end of day interview voice. So forgive me if I sound a bit surly and uncommunicative, but it's been a long day of marketing and promo, which is the ugly side of the business that I'm in, because I think of myself as a creative person, but I have to help folks sell records. So that's why I'm doing all of this. Now, how can I help you? What seems to be the problem?
Hopefully we'll make this your marketing blitz a little less painful.
That's all right. I'm a doctor. You can confide in me.
Awesome. Well, we're here talking a couple things. You got a new album. We'll get to that in a second, but I want to tell everybody that you have it's called the 7 Decades Tour coming to Wolf Trap in Virginia on August 24th. That'll be the closest to us here in DC. Can you believe it's been 7 decades?
Well, we have released an album or some music in each of those 7 decades, but that's not to suggest that it is the full 70 years that Jethro Tull has been active in the sphere, because in fact it's only a mere 55 years since we started. But it spans the end of and now in the 2020s, the relative beginning of another decade. So 7 decades is technically correct, but it's not 70 years.
Exactly. It crosses over into little bits of those decade periods. So it counts. It's a catchier title for the tour for sure. And tell us about the new album. How do you pronounce it? Is it Rock Float, your 23rd album?
Well, it began when I started work on the album on the 1st of January in 2022. I just had a working title of Rock Flute, because I had told the record company it would be a rock album featuring all the band members, and it would prominently feature the flute as a rock instrument. So that's all I had to work with. But by the end of the day, I decided on the general theme of the album, and it became rock, being the old Icelandic word for destiny, and Flöte, which is the German word for the instrument I play. Both of them intriguingly sporting a not merely decorative umlaut, as employed by the likes of Motorhead or Motley Crue, but the real correct grammatical spelling. And so I'm a double umlaut person at the moment.
The Rook Float, I guess I gotta say. Well, it's your destiny was the flute, I guess is what it kind of means. So let's go into how that destiny began. I know you're born in Scotland. What sort of stuff did you grow up listening to? How did you begin to pick up that flute in the first place? I mean, there's not a lot of rockers that can play the flute, so I'm always interested in how you picked it up to begin with.
Well, I was born in Dunfermline in 1947, and the band began in January of 1968. We began sporting the name Jethro Tull. The flute I had picked up and played for the first time only in December, just before Christmas of 1967. So I did my learning on stage, playing the clubs and pubs, including the famous Marquee Club in London. And at that point, there weren't too many people playing the flute, as you can imagine. So it was something of a novelty, and it probably became the reason we got noticed by the music press to begin with. So it didn't do any harm to be playing an unusual instrument, but there were others, like Ray Thomas of the Moody Blues played the flute and the tambourine, and Chris Wood of Traffic played saxophone and the flute. And a few people have tried to bring the flute into the world of progressive rock since then, but I suppose the prominent nature of the flute in Jethro Tull music, or much of it, is more akin to the role of the electric guitar. It's the lead instrument playing riffs and solos, and unfortunately, it's really in your face. You can't escape it.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning a couple of those other examples and differentiating too, because I know, yeah, the ones you mentioned, and then I guess Marshall Tucker Band has a little flute in there, I think, on like "Can't You See." But your point is correct that Jethro Tull is the one that it's the driving force. It is the main instrument, and I think that's why we most associate it with Jethro Tull among all the other bands. How did the formation actually come about? How'd you meet that original lineup? Because I know it's not the same guys touring with you today, but dote on praise that the original guys there for a minute.
Well, some of us moved from Blackpool in the north of England down to Luton, a town near London, and we hooked up with a guitar player and a drummer who lived in the Luton, Dunstable area. Mick Abrahams, the guitar player, and Clive Bunker, the drummer, and Glenn Cornick, who was from Blackpool, and myself. We stayed down there and got together in a 4-piece band that basically played respectable middle-class white man blues, and some of Mick Abraham's material that he played in other bands at that time. So we were plagiarizing really Black American folk music, and I wasn't really very comfortable with that approach. I'm a huge fan then, as I am still today, of Black American music, but Black American blues and jazz. I think we have to sidestep hip hop and a few other genres, but certainly the music I grew up with, it was 90% of the people I listened to were Black American, and they played the blues. So I realized that I was none of those things, and either Black American or really authentic in terms of playing a music form that was something really some 5,000 miles away from where I was. And in the second album in 1969, that's when I really began to use other influences that were closer to home, were more European. And I felt more at home with the second album, Stand Up, than I had with the first album. So we became, after a mere 6-7 months, we became what today is called progressive rock, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks for pioneering that whole genre for us. We're forever in your debt. Gratitude. You mentioned Stand Up and some of the early albums. In a second we can get to some of the ones that crossed over the pond here and became hits with America, the Aqualung and everything like that. But before that, like those early British hits, you had Love Story, Sweet Dream, Living in the Past, Witch's Promise, that kind of stuff. Like, do you have a song from that early British period before you crossed over that you think that you want American listeners to go back, if they only know your American stuff? Which ones would you want them to go back that you're most proud of?
I think a departure point actually was a song called Love Story, which was recorded in late October of 1968, and it was the last song that Mick Abrahams played on. And he wasn't very keen on the direction that I was taking in terms of writing new music. But that's his last appearance in the recording studio, and the beginning of Jethro Tull doing something that wasn't really just the blues. It was something a little bit more of a hybrid, a little bit more of a embracing influences from other kinds of music. So that was the starting point, and I think from there on, in the early part of 1968, with Martin Barr joining the band, then we took on, I think, a more interesting set of musical influences and a musical style that cemented our position in the early days, at least to begin with, in the UK. But we did tour. We toured in the USA in 1969. We did 3 tours, in fact, and it was slow, but it began to make a bit of an impact. We were fortunate to play on some shows supporting Led Zeppelin, who were already quite established as a major new act. So that got us a bit of an audience.
Imagine getting a ticket to see Led Zeppelin, and suddenly this up and coming quote unquote band Jethro Tull is opening on the bill. Like, that's a poster you'll want to frame one day, baby. All right. Well, as we mentioned, the fourth album, Aqualung, is the one that really blew up, worldwide and became huge in the States. And I know you've probably told this story a million times, but maybe our younger listeners, maybe just discovering, what was it? Wasn't it like a photo that you or your wife took of a homeless homeless man sitting on a park bench in London. It was like based on something you really saw, right?
Well, I didn't see it. It was merely, I suppose, trying to find a point of cooperative creativity. That I looked at some photographs my first wife had taken and said, let's use this as a basis for a song. And I came up with a title, and she wrote some of the lyrics and and we fleshed out the character, really talking about who this person might have been, what his life might have been like, and that became the basis for the lyrics of the song. But the riff was something that I think I quite possibly already had at that point. I know I was on tour in the USA when I came up with the da 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 dum line, and I called Martin Barr in his hotel room and said, come up here, just bring your guitar. I want you to just pick up on a couple of things and we can try them at sound check. And so I played it to him on my little Martin acoustic guitar, and he didn't seem very impressed. But I said, when we get to sound check, play these notes, turn it up to number 11 on your Marshall, and give it the full blast. And I think everybody then immediately thought, okay, now we understand what this is about. But in a way, it's rather reminiscent. Those notes could have been the clarion call of the opening of a Beethoven symphony. So it would have worked, in the classical genre with a full-on symphony orchestra, or a Gibson Les Paul with a Marshall amp.
Thanks for only you could work a Beethoven reference and a Spinal Tap reference into into describing Aqualung. I friggin' love it. But you're right, that dun, 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 it like grabs us, hits us right in the face, and doesn't let go right from the beginning of the song. Well, I'm sure a lot of people picked up that album to hear Aqualung, this huge hit that they'd heard, but in the process they got a little religious commentary on Jesus maybe being misused in his name thing, violence is that in Hymn 43, or overpopulation in Locomotive Breath, my wife's favorite song of yours, by the way, Locomotive Breath. She said I had to ask you about that, but that one's about overpopulation. Why is it important that your songs, like in those particular, they seem to, they're always about something. They're not just some catchy thing that we dance along to or something. Like if you dive into the lyrics of like a Locomotive Breath, it's always about something. Why is that important to you?
Well, the world is full of songs that are expressing personal feelings, and most typically, they're songs about being in love or being out of love. They're me, my, how I feel today kind of songs, and that's, everybody seems to do that. So I am more of an objective songwriter. I like to write about things, observe things, and then perhaps try and present them in a way that is interesting to me and the band and ultimately an audience. So I'm more of an objective songwriter. I think there are others that I would, Bruce Springsteen, for example, he is, in some ways, what he writes musically is quite often a social documentary on places that he knows, people he grew up with. And I find that much more interesting than, the endless talking about myself, which is, I get that out of my system doing all these interviews.
Absolutely.
When I come to play music, I don't want to talk about me. Done too much of it already.
Talk about the world. I love it. You're a social commentator, and you're right. You're so right about Bruce. One of his most underrated, the Ghost of Tom Joad, with the hot soup on a campfire under the bridge, and I that's a social commentary, baby. Well, cool. And then so obviously at this point in this chronological journey we're going, I'll try to speed up here, but at this point, everybody knows your stuff now, and they're kind of doubling back to discover your other stuff, and you're re-releasing songs like Living in the Past. You re-released that in 1972 and becomes a hit here in the States. Is it true you wrote that in an hour in a hotel room, in Boston, I think?
Yes, it was actually. It was written to order. Our manager wanted a song that we could record and send back to the UK to be released, because we were in the USA for 13 weeks on that first tour. And in order not to lose the interest and affiliation of the British audience. He wanted us to put something out in the UK, and so to humour him, I went upstairs to my room and said, I'll be back in an hour with a song, and I was, and it was. It was a fun thing to record. We recorded it actually a couple of days later in New York, in a studio there with a small orchestra, and then I did the vocals and the flute. I think when we got to San Francisco, then we mixed it there and sent it back to the UK to be released as a single, which strangely it did pretty well.
Wow. I don't know. How the heck do you have the talent and skill to just impromptu go up? I'll be back in an hour with a song. That's incredible to me. Bravo to you for that. All right. Well, maybe time. Go ahead.
I think in many ways that things don't change. It's about having, Frank Zappa had a band called the Mothers of Invention, and that really is essentially the nature of my songwriting. I mean, I tend, when I don't need to write anything, I probably don't. It's when I know that I actually have to wake up in the morning and get on with it, because today I have to write a song, or in the next 2 weeks I have to write an entire album. Then that's the way I work. I like to have a bit of pressure, a little bit of need to engage with the creative process and really try and achieve something. And I've always felt that it's not really very difficult to write a song. It's quite difficult to write a great song, but writing an okay song is a start. And then you have the opportunity to turn that okay song into a great song if you apply yourself and use your skills as a producer, as an arranger. You can build upon an idea that perhaps in its first edition is maybe not such a great song, but keep working on it. And that maybe takes hours. It might take days or even weeks, but you can still turn an okay song into a good song if you apply yourself and you have the skill. So sometimes you get right out of the box, you've got a great idea, it's going to be a great song, but quite often it requires a little bit more skill and editing and adjusting to take an idea and turn it into the same quality and standard as you hope the rest of your work has.
You hear that, young songwriters? An okay to mediocre song on the page is better than no song at all, because you don't stare at the blank page. Just get something out and you can always punch it up later, is what Ian Anderson's advice is. All right, well, maybe only time for one more song. Then I know you've had a million, but my listeners will kill me if I don't at least ask about, 1984, Bungle in the Jungle, one of your most famous, using the, I guess, animal kingdom analogies for we mere mortal humans. Where'd you get that idea? Were you out, in the forest one day? I always am curious what sparks these things for you.
Well, it was the refinement of a song that wasn't a very good song that we'd actually worked on a year before when we were recording in France, but didn't really come up with an album project that I think was of sufficient quality. But one of the songs was indeed called, not Bungle in the Jungle, it was called The Law of the Bungle. And that led to Bungle in the Jungle as being I suppose, likening human society and characters in the real world to being the animals of a jungle, a cruel, bitter jungle society where where the big guys eat the little guys, and that is very evident to me living here in the countryside, because hardly a day goes past when I don't come down to find body parts in the kitchen. Not because I had an argument with my wife, but because one of our two cats is a prodigious killer, and he brings in birds and mice and occasionally rats that he's caught and wants to share that process with us. So, I've always had a respect for animals and their natural inclination to be brutal. And in the case of house cats, they are our friends, our buddies. They spend their time with us, but they never have lost that wild animal instinct to go out and kill something, either just for the fun of it or perhaps to eat. But they bring them back to the kitchen. I mean, we've even found them. They will put them in their cat food bowl as a sort of prize to say, "Look what I brought my own dinner today."
In the cat food bowl. I
Yeah.
served
Well,
myself.
it's terribly sad. I mean, I maybe 25% of the time, an animal they bring in, I manage to get it and manage to take it gently away from them and release back into the wild outside in a direction they wouldn't normally go. So yesterday I saved a small bird that was still fluttering about, and I hope it survived. And a few days ago, there were a couple of mice that I managed to wrest away from those angry felines, and hopefully the mouse went on to live another day. Well, probably only one day, because he probably got caught again 24 hours later.
Look at you saving the animal kingdom. They're sitting in a food bowl. Well, we'll have to. I do want to tell everybody, give you credit that Bungle in the Jungle arrived on October 14th, 1974, before October 30th, 74, which was the Rumble in the Jungle with George Foreman versus Muhammad Ali. So you guys were first, and they stole it from you, not the other way around. We got to tell everybody that. Very cool. Well, you've been generous with your time. I have to ask, as you know, what do you say, like early millennial myself, a lot of our generation knows Aqualung from Will Ferrell. Ron Burgundy and Anchorman. What was it like when you saw him doing a spoof on the flute in a zany comedy like that? Do you kind of roll your eyes, or do you take that as ultimate form of flattery?
Well, I had a couple of conversations about that character. I don't think it was necessarily only Jethro Tull that he was lampooning in terms of his character. I think there was a strong connection with a friend of mine who was a Washington resident and well known, I suppose, through his radio program as a presenter on Fox radio.
Was it? In DC? Here in DC?
Yeah, and then he became the press secretary for George W. Bush. His name was Tony Snow, and Tony was a really great guy. I mean, an ardent Republican, but he was a real gentleman, and he was admired and respected by Democrats and Republicans alike as being a fair guy and a genuine, I suppose, quite old-fashioned, traditional human being in terms of American politics and particularly in the cutthroat world of politics in Washington. So he was well respected, and he was a jazz flute player. That's how we kind of got to know each other. And I think the Ron Burgundy character, because it obviously the guy is a TV anchorman. Well, Tony Snow was a radio anchorman and a jazz flute player, rather like Ron Burgundy. Is in the character. So I think it's modeled on Tony, but with a little bit of the Jethro Tull character thrown in the finale.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. I'd forget, and for a DC station, that's perfect. You just made my day to have a local connection. I'd forgotten that Tony Snow was a flute player, and I know he passed away in 2008, like right at the end of the George W. Bush administration. So yeah, rest in peace.
He did, and in fact, Tony's last job when his cancer returned. At a terminal level, so he knew he wasn't going to live very long, but he took a job right at the very end for CNN, who wanted to hire Tony to reflect, the Republican viewpoint and the run up to the election, which Obama won. But it was I think quite a noble thing that he took the job in good faith because of his ideological Republican sentiments, but CNN wanted somebody who would be the Republican in town, just as at that point Fox TV had their tame Democrat supporting presenter who was part of nightly shows. You wouldn't find that today. I mean, I think these days things have become so partisan and so divided that generosity of spirit no longer exists in political television.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And we're all the worse off because of it. Well, I didn't know we'd be talking politics, but it all factors, all your songs are political and social and objective. So it all fits. So, hey, thank you so much for doing this. I guess final seconds. What do we got to do to get Jethro Tull in the Rock Hall of Fame? I'm sure you don't care, but come on, what do we got to do? I mean, 7 decades. Come on.
I don't think Jethro Tull really belongs in what is an American institution about Americana in musical terms. And
Okay.
I've always felt the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame should be reflecting the huge array of talent and historical important contributors to America's music, far in as a priority in relation to what is offered up to musicians from other countries, which, after all, are more likely to be the UK. I don't think you'll find in the Hall of Fame too many people who, were French or German rock artists or whatever. It's mostly Brits, but I think the most of the Brits who are in the Hall of Fame are people who owe a huge amount to American music in terms of their style and their way of performing. They are embracing Americana in what they have produced musically, whereas Jethro Tull since 1968 has not really owed a great deal to American music. We've tended to follow a different path, so I don't think we really qualified. And yes, you're quite right in a sense that I wouldn't really want to be faced with that embarrassing situation of being asked to enter the hallowed portals of the Hall of Fame. I mean, you will find Jethro Tull in the rock and roll, whatever it's called, in Cleveland, because we were one of the first acts to be represented in there when it opened its doors. But in terms of being inducted, well, that is a whole different matter, and I think I'm very very happy to be sitting on the outside of that world, because I just really don't feel Jethro Tull merits or belongs in that institution.
Well said. Yeah, I mean, there's probably plenty of Jethros, people named Jethro in America, but you guys are off doing your own thing, and the name actually comes from an agriculturalist, the 18th century or something. So it's fitting to stay over on that side of the pond in terms of these.
Well, that's right. British inventor of the seed drill and agricultural innovator. But of course, Jethro at that point is, particularly in the southwest of England, was a common name, and Jethro is a biblical name. So I think it has its deep historical perspective, and luckily I'm not the guy who thought of it. It was our agent who gave us the name Jethro Tull back in '68, so we have him to blame.
Well, we have you to thank for being so generous with your time. We'll let you run, but we'll tell everybody, pick up a copy of the new album, Rook. How do I say it? Not Rock Float, Rook Float?
Yeah.
How do I say it?
Rock Floater. Rock Floater.
Pick up a copy of Rook Floater,
Yeah,
the 23rd album by Jethro Tull. And also, circle your calendars and get your tickets for the 7 Decades tour at Wolf Trap in Virginia on August 24th. Hey, Ian Anderson, thanks so much for making this happen. I really appreciate it.
Terrific. Nice to talk to you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Our theme music is Scott Buckley's Clarion. Remember to give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time.